In the sun-drenched hills of Languedoc, in the south of France, there once lived a people whose beliefs would bring them both extraordinary peace and unimaginable tragedy. They called themselves the Good Christians, but history remembers them by another name, the Cathars. To the outside world, they were heretics. To those who knew them, they were seekers of the pure light, guardians of a truth so dangerous it would cost them their lives. They lived simply. Their villages were places where justice was fair, women could hold positions of spiritual authority, and compassion shaped daily life. They refused to kill, would not swear oaths, and sought no wealth for themselves. To the Cathars, the world of matter, the stones beneath their feet, the food they ate, the very bodies they inhabited, was not the creation of the true God, but the work of a lesser, false power. The true God was pure light, beyond all form, and our souls were sparks of that light, trapped in the prison of this material world. Their mission was not to dominate kingdoms or convert the unwilling, it was to awaken, to remember our origin, and to return to the source beyond the stars. And for a time, in their mountain strongholds and in the open plains, they flourished. But the freedom of Languedoc could not last forever. Word of the Cathar faith, its growing influence, its rejection of the Church's authority, had reached the highest halls of power in Rome. To the Pope, this was not just heresy. It was an infection spreading in the very heart of Christendom. And in 1208, the infection would be met with fire. It began with blood. A papal legate, an emissary of the Pope, was murdered in the south. Whether the Cathars had any hand in it remains uncertain, but for Rome, it was the perfect excuse. Pope Innocent III called for a crusade, not against the Muslim East, but against fellow Christians. The Albigensian Crusade, named after the Cathars' center of Albi, descended upon Languedoc like a storm. Armies from the north marched south, clad in steel and bearing the cross on their tunics, but this was not a holy pilgrimage, it was conquest. When they reached the city of Béziers in 1209, the Crusaders demanded the Cathars be handed over. The townspeople refused. And so, the army attacked. Soldiers poured through the gates, cutting down everyone in their path, men, women, and children. No distinction was made between Cathar and Catholic. The papal commander's words still echo through history, "Kill them all, God will know his own." By nightfall, Béziers was nothing but ash and bone, and this was only the beginning. Town after town fell. In some, the Cathars fled into the hills, finding refuge in remote fortresses like Montségur and Queribus. In others, they stayed, hoping their peaceful way of life might save them. But the crusade was not merely a war of swords, it was a war on memory, on belief, on the idea that there could be another way. And in this war, even the songs of the troubadours began to fade, replaced by the sound of marching boots and the crackle of fire. Yet, the Cathars did not vanish. In the shadows, their perfecti still traveled, still whispered, still kept the light alive. High above the valleys of the Pyrenees, perched on a limestone spur, stood the fortress of Montségur. It was more than a stronghold, it was the heart of Cathar resistance, a beacon of hope for those who still clung to the light. By 1243, it had become the last refuge for the perfecti, believers, and their families. From here, they looked out across the land they once knew as free, now darkened by the shadow of Crusader rule. The crusading army arrived in the spring, encircling the mountain with steel and siege engines. For months, they waited. The Cathars inside rationed their food, melted snow for water, and prayed in the flickering glow of candlelight. And each dawn, the white flag of surrender remained absent from the walls. But Montségur's defense could not last forever. The walls were strong, but the people inside were weary. In March of 1244, the gates fell. The Crusaders offered the Cathars a final choice: renounce your beliefs and live, or remain steadfast and die. 225 souls walked calmly to a field at the base of the fortress. There, a massive pyre awaited them. They held hands. They sang. And as the flames rose, they stepped into the fire as one. But the story does not end in ashes. For legend whispers that, before the final surrender, a small group of Cathars slipped out through hidden paths in the cliffs, carrying with them a great treasure. What this treasure was remains a mystery. Some say it was gold and silver, the wealth of their community. Others believe it was something far greater, sacred manuscripts containing their deepest teachings. Or perhaps an artifact from far older times, a relic of the original light. Whatever it was, it has never been found, and some believe it still lies hidden in the mountains, waiting for the laurel to turn green again. What, exactly, were the Cathars willing to die for? The Church claimed they were heretics, twisting the gospel. But when we strip away the accusations and listen closely to the voices that survived, a different picture emerges, one painted in light and shadow. The Cathars believed in two principles: the God of pure light, beyond all time and form, and the false god, lord of this material world, a craftsman who shaped matter and bound souls within it. To the Cathars, earth was not our home, it was a place of exile, a prison of flesh where the divine spark within us lay sleeping. Every desire, every attachment, every cruelty of this world was a chain binding us to the cycle of birth and death. Their mission was liberation, not salvation through church sacraments, but through gnosis, direct knowledge of the soul's origin and its path back to the light. They taught that Christ was not born in the flesh, but came as a being of pure spirit. His message was not about building kingdoms on earth, but about escaping the grasp of the false god altogether. This teaching was crystallized in their highest rite, the consolamentum. It was not baptism with water, but with spirit. Given only once, often at the end of life, it was believed to sever the soul from the bonds of matter, freeing it to ascend beyond the stars. They rejected violence, refused to swear oaths, and would not kill, for to kill another being was to destroy a spark of the same divine light they sought to free. Even eating meat was shunned by the perfecti, for it was seen as consuming the flesh of a fellow prisoner. But perhaps the most forbidden aspect of their teaching was this: the church, the state, the lords of this world, all served, knowingly or unknowingly, the false god. True freedom meant breaking their hold, not through rebellion of sword and shield, but through the quiet, unstoppable revolution of the soul. It was this belief that no earthly power had authority over the spirit, that Rome could never allow to survive. Though the pyres of Montségur turned the Cathars to ash, their ideas were not so easily burned away. Like seeds carried on the wind, their teachings drifted into unexpected places, sprouting quietly in the minds of poets, philosophers, and seekers of hidden light. Some say their spiritual DNA can be traced in the Brotherhood of the Free Spirit, a medieval movement that taught that those united with God were beyond the laws of man. Others see their influence in the Anabaptists, who rejected the authority of the established church and sought a return to the purity of the early faith. But their echo wasn't only in religion, it rippled through culture. In the south of France, certain troubadour songs kept their subtle, symbolic language alive for generations. Some spoke of a distant beloved, a home beyond the stars, a final liberation that awaited the faithful. In Renaissance Italy, scholars rediscovering the wisdom of antiquity came across Gnostic and dualist texts, writings whose spirit closely mirrored that of the Cathars. Though they may not have named them, the resonance was there, like a melody heard faintly through the centuries. And in more modern times, whispers of the Cathar worldview have resurfaced in unexpected places, in esoteric orders, in mystical interpretations of Christianity, even in New Age teachings about escaping the illusion of the material plane. For while their name may be buried under layers of history, their core message still calls to certain souls, that there is something within us that does not belong to this world, that beyond the veil of appearances lies a greater light, and that the true journey is not upward in power or wealth, but inward, toward the source of that light. Perhaps this is why, even now, in a world far removed from theirs, the story of the Cathars still draws us. It is not just history, it is a mirror, reflecting both our longing and our fear of what freedom might truly mean. As the flames consumed the last defenders of Montségur in 1244, a prophecy was spoken, a promise carried on the wind: in 700 years, the laurel will turn green again, and we will return. It was a strange and haunting vow. The laurel, sacred to victory and immortality in the ancient world, was said to be a symbol of the soul's triumph over death. For the Cathars, its greening was more than a seasonal change, it was the sign of a rebirth. 700 years after Montségur brings us to the mid-20th century, a time of upheaval, awakening, and rebellion against the rigid structures of the old world. Some see in this era the fulfillment of the Cathar prophecy, the rise of global communication, the rediscovery of suppressed Gnostic texts, the birth of new spiritual movements. All could be seen as the laurel turning green. In southern France, during this time, there was a renewed interest in Cathar history. Pilgrims began climbing the path to Montségur once more, not to fight, but to remember. Researchers uncovered old manuscripts, and storytellers kept the memory alive in books, films, and song. And here's where the mystery deepens. Certain modern esoteric groups claim direct descent from the Cathars, not in bloodline, but in spirit. They speak of the return of the perfecti in new forms, as teachers and healers scattered across the world, quietly working to awaken the spark in those ready to see beyond the veil. Others interpret the prophecy on a more personal level. Perhaps 700 years does not only mark a date on a calendar, but also the long journey of the soul, the cycles it must pass through before awakening. The laurel turning green might not be an event in history, but an event within you. And so, the question lingers: has the prophecy already been fulfilled, or is it still waiting for its true hour, for the moment when the light will rise again, not in secret, but in full view of the world? In the ruins of Cathar castles, the stones themselves seem to hold memory. You can walk among them today, at Montségur, Guerabas, pay repertus, and feel something almost tangible, as if the air is charged with a quiet defiance. For the Cathars, their faith was not a set of rules carved in stone, but a way of being. That way of being can still be lived, not as a copy of the past, but as a living thread carried forward. The first lesson of their legacy is inner sovereignty. To the Cathars, no external power, be it crown, church, or even fate, could command the soul. If you choose to live by the light, then your choices, your compassion, and your truth are your law. The second lesson is nonviolence, not as weakness, but as an unshakable refusal to harm the divine spark in others. Even in a world that met them with fire, they answered without sword or arrow. That courage is rare, and it changes the one who lives it. And the third lesson is purity of intent. The Cathars were not perfect beings, despite their name Perfecti, but they sought to align their every action with the light. In a time where corruption was the language of power, their lives were a silent rebellion. For modern seekers, these principles still have power. You may not renounce all possessions or retreat to a mountain fortress, but you can walk through this world without being of it. You can choose compassion over greed, truth over comfort, and the quiet voice of your own conscience over the roar of the crowd. Perhaps that is the truest way to honor them, not simply to remember their deaths, but to live their light. And so, the modern quest begins not on the ramparts of Montségur, but within the walls of your own heart. It begins when you look at the world, with all its illusions and temptations, and say, as they did, "This is not my home." History records the Cathars as a people erased, their towns destroyed, their names forgotten, their faith condemned. Yet, when we listen closely, we realize something astonishing: they are not gone. Every time a soul refuses to kneel to false power, the Cathars breathe again. Every time someone chooses truth over safety, they stand in the field at Montségur, hand in hand, facing the fire without fear. The flames that consumed them were meant to destroy. But the light they carried is not a light of wood or oil, it is the light that was here before the stars were born, and will remain after the last star fades. It is the light you carry now, hidden perhaps, but waiting, always waiting, to be remembered. Maybe the forbidden part of their teaching was never the dualism or the rejection of material power. Maybe the real danger, to the rulers of the world, was the idea that every person holds a direct and unbreakable link to the divine. That no priest, no king, no institution can stand between you and that eternal source. And if that is true, then their story is not just history, it is a mirror held up to you. The Cathars believed the soul could awaken in a single lifetime, if only you remembered who you truly are. The question they leave us is simple: will you awaken? And perhaps, one day, far in the future, when the laurel turns green again in your own heart, you will remember this moment, and realize you were never just hearing the story of the Cathars. You were hearing your own story, whispered back to you across the centuries, in the language of light.